Hello, book lovers. My name is Natalie, and I love books, so let's talk about them. All right. So, my first book review of 2020, I think. No, I'm pretty sure it is. Okay. So anyway, I wanted to go ahead and talk about Iced and Burned Together. Way back, at least like 7 or 8 years ago, I discovered the Fever series by Karen Marie Moning. I think it started with Dream Fever and ended with Shadowfever. I'm not sure, and I'm not looking at anything specifically right now. If I'm wrong, I'll just put something around here or there, whatever. But I loved those books. Those books were just so good to me. I really enjoyed them. They were, I didn't have to think about them real hard. They were in the paranormal romance section. They were about fae when, not a lot of books were about fae. And I really, really just enjoyed them a lot. They were not, they're in the adult section, paranormal romance, like I said. And what it basically was this girl, this woman discovers that, her sister died, and she goes to Dublin, and she discovers that she has some powers. She is a she-seer. She can see the fae. And then what happens is, during the course of this series, I'm going to give a quick synopsis. If you don't want to be spoiled, this is not the video for you. But I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be watching. What? My dog's making noises at me over there. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be watching if you didn't know something about these books. So, the walls come crashing down between like the fairy realm and the human realm, and now the fae are just everywhere. It's chaos. A lot of people died. It was crazy. Okay, so at the end of Shadowfever, Mac and Jericho, Mac being the main character of the Fever series, they'd kind of found like a happy ever after ending. So, and at that point in time, we didn't think there was going to be any continuation. And then Iced came out. First off, I didn't even realize that it was part of the Fever series. And then finally, when there was Goodreads and I could go look it up, here's an example of why you should never read those reviews before you read a book. If you care at all about like making your own opinions about books, I let the opinions of others sway whether I was going to read this book or not. And they had some things to say about this book, which I will address later, that weren't very good. And I was like, if that's what it is, then I don't want to read it. And I understand, why people would have that viewpoint, because these had always been billed as paranormal romance. They weren't like in an urban fantasy section. They were always in the paranormal romance section. So keep that in mind while I talk about Iced. So let's talk about Iced first. I read both Iced and Burned, which I'm glad I did because I feel like they kind of go together. Like, read them both at the same time and it'll feel a little more cohesive to you if you do. So in Iced, we've got Iced and Burned. They were both written by Karen Marie Moning in this Fever series. So let's talk about what Iced is about. So in Iced, we get a close-up and personal look at the life of Danny Mega O'Malley. She's a character that we see in the Fever series. And so in this book, we kind of get to see her a little bit close up, find out a little more about her life, maybe her backstory. So aside from that, something is freezing people in Dublin and Ryodan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Ryodan, whenever I see it, that's how I pronounce it. Ryodan wants to know what it is. I mean, it has frozen an entire subclub of Chester's, which is his nightclub. And so he wants to know what just froze my thing, what is happening. So he decides to enlist the aid of Danny O'Malley, a 14-year-old with she-seer's superpowers. She's like a little bit stronger than most other she-seers. Basically, a she-seer is a person who, before the walls came down, could tell a fae, could identify a fae even with their glamour on. So, what might look like a normal person to any normal human being, they would be able to tell that they were fae. So together they need to find out the mystery behind the freezings before the world is iced and possibly explodes. So, what did I like about it? I liked getting up close and personal, even though Dani was never a character that I really loved. I kind of would speed read through her parts in the Fever series. You know, I really did appreciate her point of view in this book. I also thought the more intimate look into her past and her life was really interesting. I'm looking at my notes, by the way. If that's distracting, I'm sorry. This was also really fast-paced. So boredom never really set in, which can sometimes happen when you're dealing with characters that you maybe didn't like. Of course, with that, you get the other side of the coin and what I didn't like, which was it sometimes sagged, especially when things weren't in the process of happening. The backstory was a bit lackluster. I mean, which was weird because, I mean, technically the backstory was very interesting, but I think it was presented to us in a very lackluster way. And I felt like this could have been a much tighter book. I think if it had been a 350-page book, it would have been much better than the 500-page book that it was. It kind of suffered from what Stephen King books kind of suffer from at times, which is just there's too much and you don't need all of it. I really appreciate the world that Karen Marie Moning created, and I appreciate that she really understands her characters' backstories, but I felt like we didn't need all of it. We didn't need every single thought. We didn't need every single thought process. So, I mean, there's that. So my final thoughts. So a lot of people have complained that Christian and Ryodan are straight up what's the word I want to use? It starts with a P and it ends with a file, and she's a 14-year-old girl and they're two adult males, so connect the dots. I'm sure you can. And that Dani, like, lusting after them is gross. First off, I didn't really see her lusting after them. She had seen Ryodan in a compromising position, so I did see her, like, what I saw personally, okay, and I'm gonna, first let me disclaim this. If you feel like those two characters were being that word that starts with a P, then I 100% respect that view. It is valid. I can see where you got it. I can see how you made that, connected those dots and why you feel that way. 100% I see it. I didn't feel like it came off that way to me, but I can see how you would jump to that conclusion. Okay, valid, 100%. What I saw though was these two characters were originally really, like, Ryodan is right towing that line between good and evil, and Christian is becoming evil. And I felt like that was, first off, I saw Ryodan as more of, he would eventually become a father figure as opposed to someone that she would be with in a romantic way. And Christian, I felt like what we were seeing was something that would be explained a little more later, which was ironically explained a little more later. That it was something that he was struggling with because he was becoming evil. There were a few very questionable scenes though, and again, I'm not gonna invalidate anyone's belief that this was what was happening. I also think that it was a mistake ever to put these books in the paranormal romance section, and if you're reading paranormal romance and this is the next book, you're like, okay, this is a paranormal romance, this must be where it's heading. For me personally, I would have liked it better. So I didn't see anything overt. However, I would have liked it better if Karen Marie Moning hadn't written in Christian's crush on Dani. I mean, she did write that it was something he was struggling with, but at times it didn't seem like a struggle. And so again, I can completely see how people would make that decision and believe that this was where it was going to go from here. And I would what else? And imply that Ryodan was waiting for her to grow up. So in the book, it is implied several times that Ryodan is waiting for her to grow up so he can be with her. And again, I don't think that was necessary. Even if that was what you wanted to say, implying that was a bad decision, I think, on her part, on account of the fact that it's a paranormal romance. People are looking for relationships, you know, even if you were setting up for a father figure type of thing, you know, even if that was supposed to be a joke, it was a bad joke. It was, you know, it didn't come off as jokey. It came off as kind of serious. So it wasn't, you know, again, nothing overt was happening. And I get that this is supposed to be a dark world we're in. So I see what you were trying to do. I see what the author was trying to do. I just don't think it came off very well, especially with so many people objecting to it. I mean, when you have that many people objecting to it, you have to look at it as, well, maybe I wrote something wrong there. I didn't see any setups also for relationships with Ryodan or Christian in this book. In Burned, it's a different story, but we'll get to that. I thought it was pretty clear that Karen Marie Moning was setting up for a relationship between Danny and Dancer. And Dancer is much more in her age range. You know, I think he's supposed to be like 17 and she's 14. So while there was not anything, again, overt happening because we're reading about a 14-year-old, you know, I feel like this book got a lot of flack for that when I've seen other books with young or younger characters getting, I mean, straight up having that happen. And remember, I mean, this is a series where the main character of the last 5 did get raped, and that is, you know, not off the table in this series. So, I mean, I see where she was trying to go. I see where the people who had a problem with it were coming from as well. I just, again, I think this book suffered from, it was poorly done, which we're trying to do. I see where the setups were going, having read the second book. I just don't think it was done real well. That's really it. Let's see. I mentioned that, you know, and so my final rating, okay, so despite the sagging parts, I still did enjoy this book, so I gave it a 4 stars. Now let's go to Burned, where you kind of see what was supposed to be set up, but oh, guys, Burned. All right, so what's that about? It's about the loose ends and Ice getting tied up. I wish I was kidding. But that's basically it. So Mac and Jericho supposedly got their happy ending in Shadowfever, except maybe everything isn't so happy. The Shisadu, which I always want to pronounce as dove, but she says very plainly in her books that it's Shisadu, is constantly telling Mac what to do, and to combat it, she does absolutely nothing for 475 pages. Except when they rescue Christian from the Crimson Hag. Yeah. So what I liked about it, I liked that the loose ends got tied up in Ice. Sometimes you'll read a book and there'll be a lot of loose ends and no one will ever tie them up. That's fine. Okay, what I didn't like. Mac did absolutely nothing for almost the entire book, except murder the Grey Woman and a Guardian. So murdering the Grey Woman was not unwarranted. The Guardian, I see what you were trying to do there. I see what the author was trying to do. And rescue Christian, kind of on the rescuing Christian thing, okay? Other than that, she spent a good portion of the 400-page book just angsting over the fact that she is a walking Shisadu, which is a very, very evil book in this, you know, in this world, and that she's not having any sex. And, oh, and then at one point she turns invisible. Oh, and she wants to forgive Danny, but she won't. I thought the way that the author showed conflict here was really lazy, and like she either didn't want to write it or originally wanted it to be a different story, which I really do believe, because I know that in the front of, or maybe in the back of Iced, I have them on Kindle, so it's kind of different, but Iced was listed as the first in the Danny O'Malley trilogy. And then in Burned, you see, you know, just Fever series start, you know, Iced and Burned. So I really feel like this was probably not the book that she wanted to write. Also, I cannot decide if the decisions with Dani's character was great and were the ones that she set up in Iced, or if, you know, or if it was just really lazy. I mean, on the one hand, I see everything that was being alluded to in Iced. On the other hand, I really hate how it was treated and burned, and really wish this had been another Dani book. I feel like the events that happened in Burned would have been so much better if they had been from Dani's perspective. And I mean, that's it. I mean, honestly, I think this was supposed to be a second Dani book. And the change made the book fall so flat. Whoever the author had whispering in her ear needs to be fired. I know that people had a lot of objections with the first. And perhaps she was setting it up for her relationships with Ryden and Christian. And now I have to explain something. So if you haven't read this book and you want to read this book and you don't want to be spoiled, you can like stop the video here. But I don't feel like it's a huge spoiler, because about like you figure it out really quick what the deal is with this other character. So what happens to Dani is she got chased into, you know, she gets chased into the Silvers, into the fairy world, to the Hall of Days, at the beginning of Burned. And then about, I don't know, a few chapters in, we meet another character called Jada, which turns out to be Dani. Okay. And she's now 19. She's been in the Hall of Days for like 5 years. Clearly she's changed. I won't say the other plot twist. But anyway, so that's her. And I feel like, listen, you already messed up with the first one. People thought that these two guys were pedophiles and all of that. If you would have just stuck with Dani, who was clearly having the more interesting adventures in Burned, I think it would have gone so much better than going for Mac, who clearly you were not ready to write her any kind of new adventures, because she does absolutely nothing in this book other than angst. And then turn invisible. I mean, I feel like that's really lazy writing. It was bad. Except, you know, there was a cliffhanger at the very end. So I'm going to read the next one because I need to know. And I mean, I could forgive a couple of bad books because the first 5 books were so amazing, or at least I remember them being so amazing. But, you know, I really would have rather seen the author's vision carried out if you were going to start running down that road, instead of pandering to critics that believe they're still reading a paranormal fantasy or paranormal romance and not an urban fantasy. Clearly, you know, when I go back and I read some of the things she says about the book, she knew she was starting an urban fantasy from the beginning. It was not a paranormal romance. They just happened to slot her in there because that's what she had written before. She had written, you know, Highlander romances, from what I remember. So, you know, just you already went wrong in Iced to where people were upset. Why not just keep going? You already have people upset at you. Why not just keep going and show them what your vision was? Because again, I can see where the stuff that happens with Jada Dani in Burn was alluded to in Iced. And I would have thought it was so much more interesting if we would have gotten to see that process in Burned instead of making it about Mac and Jericho. I know a lot of people were complaining because it wasn't about Mac and Jericho. But it didn't need to be about Mac and Jericho. We could have seen their lives from outside. There are plenty of series that do that. You know, they show us these two characters, and then the next book they show those characters. You know, those characters make an appearance. I mean, you did that. The author did that. She had another series which was about Highlanders, and they make an appearance in Fever. In fact, I believe that one of the characters is a main character in Fever. I don't know. I haven't read those books. I want to. But I feel like this could have been done so much better instead of giving me like 475 pages of Mac angsting, and being like an observer instead of a doer. About the only thing interesting was when the She Saw Do would tell her to do things and she was arguing with it. But even that was so pale, you know, in comparison to the stuff that had happened before. So did not like it. Honestly, I would have probably given it a 2 stars, but Danny's development, even though we didn't see a whole lot of it, and the cliffhanger at the end bumped it up to like 3 stars. But, you know, and I will continue reading these books because I enjoy them. And at some point I do want to start with like the Highlander series because they clearly like talk about those guys a lot in the Fever series. I want to start with the Highlander series and just read it all the way through and get a more cohesive picture. But I feel like this book was supposed to be something else, and she saw what people were saying about Iced and was like, well, then I'll just change it, you know? And I'm like, you already started. You might as well stick with it, you know? And show people what... Because I feel like Iced would make more sense in that context. If you showed, you know, okay, well, here's what I was trying to do, and here's the next installment. See what I was trying to do? Yeah, you might still have people going, well, you just made her 5 years older so she could be with those people. Well, maybe, but it would, again, I would have preferred to see Danny's story in this one instead of Mac's. And I loved Mac in the original series. So this was a big fat no for me. Read Iced. It's good. If you've read the Fever series and you were like obsessed with me with it like I was, oh my gosh, my words. My making the words thing is not working today. If you loved the Fever series, the original 5, don't have high expectations for these, but read them because I love the world. I think it's a very well done world, and I'm hoping that the books get better. You know, have lower expectations. That's what I'm trying to say. Just have lower expectations of these, and, you know, don't expect them to be the first 5 because they're not. I think that's about everything I wanted to say about those books. I am reading a couple of other books, hopefully. Oh, my leg fell asleep. Hopefully I'll be back with reviews about those soon. Probably after this one will be my January wrap up, and I don't think I'll have read a lot of books in January, but hopefully February will be a different story. But yeah, so that's all I've got for you today. I am so glad that you decided to spend this time with me. Sorry, I'm rubbing my leg because it fell asleep and it's gonna really hurt when I stand up. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you liked my video, please give me a thumbs up. If you are interested in seeing more content from me, there will be a card. You know, there will be a couple of video suggestions in the end card. If you're not completely hating my content, consider subscribing. You can always unsubscribe later. So thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. And bye.